Hi, my name is Shelby Redfield Kilgore, and I am the Korean adoptee of all of these foster care and adoption videos on this YouTube channel. And when I have the energy and time, I also share an update about my health journey, which is something that I consider intertwined with my adoption journey, both lifelong. I am a stage 3 breast cancer survivor, which led me to do another family search to find more information about my family health history. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to talk about a book that I highly recommend and believe it should be a required reading for anyone considering transracial adoption or transracial foster care, legal guardianship. And it is a book written by Angela Tucker, and she wrote a book called You Should Be Grateful: Stories of Race, Identity, and Transracial Adoption. Angela Tucker is probably one of the most widely known transracial voices in the adoptee community, adoption community, and also the general public. She was featured in a documentary entitled Closure, where she candidly shares about being a transracial adoptee from foster care and her search for her biological roots. She also was featured on Red Table Talk hosted by Jada Pinkett Smith, and she is the host of the podcast The Adoptee Next Door and has a video series called The Adopted Life. Angela Tucker has worked on the other side of the adoption industry, where she would counsel and coach adoptive parents in what it looks like to navigate an open adoption. But unfortunately, because she kept seeing so few adoptive parents actually moving forward or maintaining an open adoption, it was too hard for her to continue working on that side of the adoption industry. And now, currently, she has this mentorship program called Adoptee Lounge, where she speaks along with other people that have been trained with adoptees, children, and both adults. So it's creating this safe space for adoptees to find community and to feel free to share their thoughts about adoption, whether good or bad, and without the fear of hurting their adoptive parents' feelings, or also just finding language or the words to describe what they're feeling that they haven't been able to articulate yet. So I'm going to just give a little breakdown about the book, but not too much, because I really want you to read this book if you haven't already, and how I personally relate to pieces of Angela Tucker's story as a transracial adoptee myself. Angela Tucker's book is broken into 3 parts. The first part is where she talks about discovering, the second part experiencing, and the third part reckoning. And in the first part, she talks about more in depth about Adoptee Lounge and the cost of adoption, the ghost kingdom that adoptees create in their minds as a way to process their adoption. And also she starts talking about the search. In the second part of her book, Angela Tucker talks about white privilege, her biological parents, survivor's guilt, and filling a void or searching to fill a void. In her third part of the book, Reckoning, she talks about us versus them, the sondosphere, and out of bounds love. Angela Tucker masterfully weaves her own personal adoption journey with that of the stories that she has heard over her years in working in the adoption field, and we gain invaluable insight from other adoptees, from questions that people looking to adopt have asked Angela, and her insight also from working on the other side of the adoption industry, where she would actually hold the original birth certificate of this adoptee before it's amended and files it away. She talks about how she felt so much guilt about doing that because she fought to have her own original birth certificate, and also working with couples looking to adopt transracially. This idea that love should be enough, but in reality, it's not when you are parenting a child with special needs and who comes from trauma. Angela tackles the dominant narratives in adoption by the general public that have been living with us for decades and decades. She does it very, very well and poignantly in this book. And "You should be grateful" is something I have heard over the years. And I remember after I was first diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, and each time I would have to fill out the paperwork and then go over it with the tech or the nurse who came in before the doctor. I'd always have to say I am adopted, so I don't have a full health history. And I remember this one lady looked at me and I thought she was gonna say, "You should be grateful that you were adopted." And I was just waiting for her to say it. And instead, because she paused, she said, "Your parents should be so grateful that they got to raise you." And I'm like, yes, they definitely are. But anyways, the same for an adoptee, being told you should be grateful, being told that you should feel anything about any way about adoption. And no one wants to be told how to feel about something that perhaps they have very strong feelings about. And it's the same thing in my cancer journey. I was also told, be positive, stay positive, but there also is something called toxic positivity. And don't get me wrong, I was very hopeful, very positive that I would survive all this treatment and I would be able to come out on the other end alive, and I did, but there were days that were harder than others, and so I had to give myself that space to be able to not be positive, to really sit in my grief and my trauma and my fear and anxiety about being diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And I think the reason why I was able to cope so well with what was going on in my life was because I was given the tools to confront grief and trauma when I was a child, so I had that environment to talk about at least, missing my birth mother, and so desperately wanting to meet her, being able to talk about that with my parents and grieving that loss. But as far as my identity as Korean, I was not able to share about my struggles with identity in that area. One of the things that Angela Tucker talks about is an experience where she was called an Oreo. And also that was brought up because she was talking about one of the kids that she was mentoring who talked about it as well, that he was called that and he embraced it, but also at the same time felt uncomfortable, out of place to challenge that comment. That made me think of when I was in high school. I remember this very vividly. Strangely though, I don't remember who said it. They called me Twinkie, so yellow on the outside, white on the inside. But I remember how I felt. I felt upset, and when I would get these emotions that were so big, I would shut down. I wouldn't know how to respond in a way where I could say, "This really hurts that you said that," but how to get them to understand. And Angela, in her book, talks about that. And it's a word, excellences, and it's basically trying to explain something to someone who will never understand. And so that's why it's so important for adoptees to find community with other adoptees that can really understand what they're going through. Angela Tucker tackles the uncomfortable, very sensitive topic of the cost of adoption. And heartbreakingly, unfortunately, this is an adoption industry, and children of color, especially Black children, in a lot of cases are priced at less expensive than adopting a white child. And that tells us that they are less than. Angela Tucker also includes stories from international adoptees, and I do remember that my parents explained to me, like, later on in life, that the waiting list for adoption, domestic adoption at the time that they were adopting in the 1980s was 5 years, the waiting list, and that they were up for adopting a child of color in the US that was older, and they were denied because they thought the child would be better suited to go in a home with parents of the same color. And so they decided to adopt internationally. Angela Tucker brings up the power of words and how simple phrases to explain things to adoptees can be very damaging and can hinder their ability to feel comfortable expressing some concerns about their adoption. One of the phrases that Angela Tucker brings up is when adoptive parents tell their adopted child that you grew in my heart. And basically, that says to the child they don't have the ability to express then if their adoption felt traumatic to them and why. One of the things that Angela Tucker brings up is the quote, "Comparison is a thief of joy," which was said by Teddy Roosevelt. And I understand the context in which she was saying that, because she was describing what it was like meeting her sister, her biological sister, and feeling survivor's guilt because, in the sense of living in a family with means, she thought to herself she did have a better life than her sister did. But for me personally, I have had therapists tell me that that quote, and it didn't sit well with me. I think really what it is that when I'm told comparison is a thief of joy, it's I'm trying to explain why I'm feeling this sense of loss or grief in relation to my adoption. And so when that's said to me, I feel like they're trying to, in a different way, say you shouldn't feel that. And I don't think that's a bad thing, what I'm feeling and expressing. I'm being present in processing my adoption losses, which will come and go throughout my life as things come up, big events in my life that may make me think of that. And so I guess for me, that personally, I am not a fan of hearing that when I'm trying to express how I'm feeling at the time. Angela Tucker talks about how she thought when she returned to her home state, Tennessee, where she was born, that she would feel at home. And she didn't. And I wanted to bring that part of her story up because I definitely related to that as well. I thought the same thing. I thought when I went to Korea when I was a teenager and then as a young adult that I would feel connected or I would feel at home or deja vu or something. But I didn't. I felt so out of place because I had grown up in a predominantly white community, and being in Korea, I was surrounded by a sea of Korean, Asian people, and I felt so out of place. It was the strangest feeling. And so I had a very same initial reaction as Angela Tucker did. Expectation versus what I actually felt. Angela Tucker talks about, filling a void, and in her book, and what that looked like as a child. And I've shared in several of my other videos, and I'll share now, like I felt that void too as an adoptee, that I wasn't enough, that I was proving my self-worth. Even as an adult, I still struggle with proving that I'm worthy. Angela Tucker doesn't give you the book on how to necessarily raise and adopt a child, but she gives stories of herself, of other adoptees she's met along the way, and what their struggles are, and what you can do if you're in a similar situation, how to guide them, how to support them. And I can't say this enough, but supporting your adopted child extends into their adulthood, because if you believe when adoptees tell you, and of course not all adoptees will say this, but that it is a lifelong journey, then be there with them for the long haul. Again, I can't say it enough. I really hope if you are impacted by adoption, directly or indirectly, and for anyone interested in learning more about adoption or is an ally, please, 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 please read this book. You Should Be Grateful: Stories of Race, Identity, and Transracial Adoption. Angela Tucker nails it when she tackles all of these controversial topics, uncomfortable conversations, sensitive topics in such a masterful way. And she really helps us understand why you should not say to adoptees, you should be grateful. If you read this book or have read it, I would love to hear your comments down below. And please don't forget to like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share with others. I hope to see you next time.